Now, what lies behind the United States' new engagement with the world, in addition to a newfound sense of humility mixed with intelligence, is this reality of contending economic priorities with the rising economic demands of domestic revival. The U.S. has less money for foreign military endeavors, and this means that foreign military policy has to be more realistic, which means that the U.S. has to come back from this unilateralist foreign policy and become more of a constructive partner in the use of its global leadership and reserving military action for the most desperate situations. As I said, this is not to say that there aren't continuities. One of the fundamental questions gripping this nation, and you've had people come here to speak to you about this, are we an empire or a republic? Do we need 700 bases around the world? Do we need a military budget as large as the 10 next countries? In this world today, where we have seen the limits of military might, we have the possibility of re-engaging the world in different terms, and that is why Obama and his escalation in Afghanistan concerns me deeply, because I worry that it will drain resources from rebuilding this nation. It may cause rifts with our European allies. It may tarnish our image as we begin to extricate from Iraq. And in a much more strategic sense, it may well destabilize Pakistan, which is truly the central point of concern. But what is clear is that there's more attention now to development issues, and there is no longer this kind of messianic wartime crusade to remake the Middle East, for example. The idea of bringing democracy at the tip of a gun has been moved out of this thinking. There is a break with the, quote, global war on terror. A 2000 report of the conservative RAND Corporation concluded that the whole notion of the war on terror has been counterproductive, inflating our enemies, isolating us from our allies. Yeah, terrorism poses a threat to national and international security, but there are far more effective ways to advance U.S. interests and security, and I think this administration understands that. Now, I do think that what we're seeing is the lag between Bush's policies and their blowback, that we haven't yet felt the full effects of the disastrous Bush legacy, particularly this instability from the current global economic crisis. In addition, there is new engagement with Iran, indicating a greater willingness to talk, suggesting that it might use a better mix of carrots and sticks. With regard to Russia, the Obama team has declared its willingness to reset the relationship, laying out a new framework for arms control agreements which will make us more secure. This is crucial. For too many years, we've lived with an administration, the Bush administration, which viewed treaties as subversive documents. The Obama administration is expanding the range of American diplomacy to give greater weight to soft and smart power. And in the Middle East, the Obama administration has signaled that it may be willing to drop the Bush administration's hostility towards Syria, welcome it back into the world of diplomacy, and more important, after years of neglect, by bringing on George Mitchell, a very smart, a deft envoy, play a role in trying to broker a peace process in the painful Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Fundamental break in renouncing the use of torture as U.S. policy. And we're beginning to comply with international law. In his first day, second day as president, Obama issued executive orders prohibiting torture, shutting secret prisons overseas, and directing closure of the detention camp at Guantanamo. This is crucial. Will Obama's policy, his national security strategy, make us safer? Yes. In some ways, I would argue, and this may surprise you, the United States is safer today than it was 8 years ago. Al-Qaeda and Islamic jihadism are much less than the threat than they were in the late 1990s and early 2000s, not, I repeat, not because of the Bush war on terror or its resort to illegal, extra-legal measures, but because all the intelligence we have suggests that Al-Qaeda doesn't have the organizational capacity or the resources to pose a danger to American lives and interests, and that their best hope for doing damage to U.S. national security is to draw the U.S. into local, irregular war zones where they can kill American soldiers or bleed American resources. I would argue al-Qaeda is incapable of posing a direct threat, not so much because of the Bush decision to fight them in Iraq or Afghanistan, but because we improved and increased our common sense counterterrorism capabilities, better intelligence, more effective border control, and police work. That is what should have happened after 9/11. Not a war on terror, but policing, coordination. The withdrawal from Iraq will make us safer, reducing the exposure of American forces to guerrilla and terrorist attack by freeing up resources to devote to other more pressing security needs, and by improving American standing in much of the Arab world, and by weakening Iran. The policy of improving relations with Russia, if it goes far enough, will also enhance American security. As I said, I do think that the most dangerous threat to the Obama foreign policy and to making the U.S. more secure is the escalation in Afghanistan. It is worth paying close attention to the testimony of Dennis Blair, the Director of National Intelligence, who in testimony to Congress in February warned that it is instability in countries around the world caused by the current global economic crisis rather than terrorism that is the primary near-term security threat to the United States. That is something to pay attention to because it demands that we, out of that, develop a new security strategy, building on what Obama has provided by way of a shift, to take the lead to craft a new vision for human security, which I will and would like to sketch in the next 5 minutes if I have the chance, because I think we need to think anew about the United States moving forward, how it can become truly secure as a republic, as a democracy, and not as an empire. Thank you.
Thank you. Rich, you have 10 minutes.
Thanks, Cleve. I just want to make sure that everyone caught something in Katrina's response on the domestic portion of her debate. I believe she said, and perhaps on this I agree with Rich. Did everyone else hear that? I think I hear that. I think I heard that. And in the same spirit, let me just say, there's a little bit of Katrina's critique of the Bush administration's approach to foreign policy that I agree with. See what a big guy I am, please. But I'll get into that a little bit later. First of all, I think we can all agree that when it comes to foreign policy and national security policy and diplomacy, that the Obama administration needs to do a much better job with its gifts. You know, first of all, you had these chintzy DVDs he gave to Gordon Brown in the White House, and yesterday you had the iPod he gave to the Queen. You know, at least he didn't give her a Snuggie. You know, here, Your Majesty, it's a blanket with sleeves. She probably didn't have one of those. She did have an iPod. My problem with a lot of the left on national security policy, I think they're really in the grips of a delusion, where they think the world is a place where all conflict can be talked away and all interests are compatible. And that's just not the case in the real world as it exists in that we live in here on this earth. There used to be a story about the Soviet Union where, in order to demonstrate the supposed fellowship and brotherhood of man, they had an exhibit at the Moscow Zoo where they had a lion and a lamb in the same cage, and visitors would go see this exhibit, would be stunned by this example of peace on earth, and they say, you know, how do you manage to do that? And they would say, well, it's easy, we just chuck in another lamb every day. And I think Barack Obama is learning, and has learned at this G20 trip to London, that the world is not just going to fall to his feet on the basis of his charm.